My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and this is 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the simple, strategic, and even challenging choices that we can make in life to become the very best version of ourselves. And the reason I talk about challenging choices is because today in the studio we have Casey Greenawalt talking about these 3 words, rethink your religion. It's a challenging conversation. It's raw and it's transparent and it's real because Casey will share a little bit about his story, about how he is evolving and changing and shifting. Same foundation, same Casey, but some very different thoughts about religion and spirituality. Listen in. Casey Greenawalt, welcome back to 3 Words Podcast, the studio, a conversation. Our friendship is so meaningful to me, and I love having you in the studio because, as many have commented, we have great chemistry. And I think the reason we have great chemistry is because we are such good friends, which is
for sure.
Good, particularly for this conversation we're going to have that we'll introduce in just a moment. But for those who don't know you, who haven't listened to one of your previous episodes and conversations with me, share with our audience, our viewers, our listeners, a little bit about yourself.
Who is Casey?
Let's go.
So I'm Casey. I grew up in Midwest America here in Toledo, BGSU area, right? Growing up for me was super fun. I always felt like I was always doing the next fun thing. And I feel like that really molded me into like who I am. And I think that's a piece of how you and I connect too, is we're always looking for like the next adventure, the next fun thing. So my life has been full of a lot of different things. I've done a lot of exciting things. Right now, my wife owns a photography business. She's been doing it for the past 10 years, and she's incredible at it. She shoots like film, fine art. It's just super, super impressive with the work she does. But she's brought me on the team over the past 5 years, so I've been able to like grow this business with her and travel with her, which is super fun. It's been really cool for our relationship and all that kind of fun stuff. Then I also work part-time for one of the largest tech companies in the world, which is super fun, and I love doing that. And I get to be a part of the DMB coaching team. I know a couple of years ago I got to hang out with you in the hockey team a lot, which was fun, and do keynotes and just hang out with people and help them become the best version of themselves.
I appreciate that, Casey.
Yeah, man.
Well, today will be interesting. An interesting conversation. I just learned a few days ago that this was actually going to be our conversation today, and I thought, ooh, interesting, provocative, and quite honestly, I'm humbled that you would have an honest conversation with me in this context for many to listen into and to view. And here are our 3 words.
Rethink your religion. Rethink your religion.
You know, religion, spirituality, these are hard conversations. You know, people have said oftentimes, don't talk about religion, money, sex, politics.
All the things we talk about.
All the things we talk about here at 3 Words Podcast. But let me in. I mean, obviously you have let me in, but let us in as viewers and listeners to why does these 3 words resonate with you right now at this time in your life?
Yeah, I want to preface all of this with the goal of this conversation is not like undo, tear apart, don't have your religion. Like that's not the goal of this conversation. So I want to like just preface that for anybody listening with skeptical ears off the get. That's important to me. It's not my goal by any means.
And me.
Yeah, for sure. For me, I grew up in church. It was always a piece of my life and something we always did. I found a lot of really positive male role models in church who built a lot of confidence in me. And I would say without the upbringing I had in church, in a large church that was great. I wouldn't be the leader, the person, the communicator, whatever it is. Like the things that I'm good at, I was developed in a lot of ways at church. So I'm so grateful for that. But I kind of joined staff, bounced around a couple different places, but eventually I made my way back to the church that I grew up at. And I moved my way up through staff. I loved it. I was good at it. It was super fun. And all of these beliefs that I had kind of like just went on the back burner because doing ministry is, like I mentioned earlier, it's fun and I like fun things. And so I just kept moving on to the next thing and the next thing. And probably about 5 years ago, I started to bring some of the things that were my beliefs, foundational things, and put them at the front and examine them a little more closely and ask myself the question, like, why do I believe this? Where does this come from? Why do other people believe this? Some of those really tough questions. And I knew some of the answers that I was going to get from the community that I was already in. And those weren't bad answers, but there were other answers out there. There were people that were smart, that were thoughtful, that were kind, that embodied a life that I would look at as a meaningful life, that didn't have those same beliefs and had different reasonings for why they didn't believe it. And they were rational and they were thoughtful. So really over the past 5 years, without getting into like what happened every year and each belief necessarily, I just started to kind of think differently about my faith until I got to a point where I was obviously still working at the church. I was a pastor. I decided it was probably not best for me to continue on staff because I had more questions than I felt like I had answers. I felt like some of the answers that I was starting to form in my head weren't aligned with what I was supposed to believe and then what I was supposed to think. And as you're on stage, influencing people, leading groups, leading teams, writing curriculum, doing all those things, like you just don't feel true to yourself, right? It had nothing to do with what I wanted to believe. It was just I couldn't do it. So had a couple conversations with, again, I speak so highly of these people because they're incredible, with some great leaders who were super kind, who care about me more than what I'm doing in the work I'm producing, which I'm super grateful for. And decided to step away from that. And it's been about a year and like 3 months not being on staff at the church anymore. I don't know if you're hearing my voice. It feels shaky right now. I was nervous for this conversation. I don't get nervous. And I was like nervous to have this conversation a little bit. For a lot of reasons, there's layers to it for sure. But that's a little bit of like my story. The trendy word in church for doing that is like deconstruction. And I hate to even like put that word out there because I don't feel like that's what I intentionally did. I think I just started to ask questions in a different way and found some other answers. And I was like, that's interesting. It's worth considering. I don't know if I see that the way I saw it before.
I wanted to pause our conversation right now, me and Casey, just to check in on you and just make sure you're doing okay in the middle of this very honest and real conversation about religion and spirituality. I know it can be a sensitive topic for many of our viewers and listeners. But with that said, we like to have real conversations here. So if you've not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel to be able to watch all the different conversations we've had about these kinds of things, this topic and many, many others, would you subscribe today? 3 Words Podcast? We'd appreciate that. Now back to our conversation. Well, and I appreciate your honesty, but I also appreciate that you're thinking, you use the word thoughtful and smart and rational. I want you to look, as a mentor in your life, I want you to look at these things through a rational lens, a thoughtful lens, a meaningful lens. In fact, we did an episode several months ago on the 3 words, change your mind. Yeah. And one of the reasons we did that is because it's in a variety of areas of our life. We change our minds. We see things differently. We go through different experiences. We do research. Right. And it's okay to change your mind. It's okay to change political views, personal views. In this case, spiritual and religious views. Yeah. I'm not going to judge that. I know even in our relationship, initially when you were kind of going through this transformation, you distance yourself from me a little bit. And I felt that, and I was like, what's going on,
I love that
Casey?
We can have this conversation.
And I was like, what's going on? Because obviously, I have so many friends, and even me included. I mean, I think differently today about a variety of religious and spiritual ideas, in a variety of all kinds of ideas across a variety of topics than I did when I was 22 years old, right? And I'm okay with that. I feel okay with that. I would never want anyone to make decisions. And so it's good to sit with you today and kind of feel the ethos of our conversation. I don't want anyone making decisions about religion, particularly, or spirituality out of anger, out of deep frustration or woundedness. I want it to be more proactive, but also not reactive, proactive, but also positive and thoughtful. And I'm very comfortable to sit in a space with you and let you process and evolve and question and doubt. In fact, the 2 episodes ago was actually with a pastor and a counselor. Doubt is okay. And we talked about the fact that it's okay.
No, those are all great.
Do you feel like this journey is okay?
No, it's a good question. I think I mentioned this to you earlier, and part of the reason I was even hesitant to maybe I would avoid you in that space because I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't like feelings, emotions. It's hard. But another part of it is this idea that when you do leave that, you do feel like you're on the out group now. Regardless of your theology or what you believe, you're no longer actively participating and engaging in the group that you've been in for so long that you just feel that way. And so when you feel on the out group, you look and you think people who you might perceive as in the in-group see you the same way. They're like, oh, you're on the outs now, right? I think another comment I'd make on that is the idea of re-examining your beliefs, and just the idea of certainty was something that I had a really big problem with. I just didn't understand how people could be so certain of what they thought based off of the little evidence that seemed to be there. People's personal experiences, you can't argue with those. I'll never argue with someone who feels like they've experienced God in a way that's unique to them. It's their experience, right? I can't say they didn't experience that.
For sure.
But from my experience, what I've experienced and the things that I'm learning, that's where I start to go, maybe this thing that I felt like I was so certain about isn't actually so certain all along. There might be truth in it somewhere, but is it that I have to submit to this certainty to continue to be in this space, like that. And I know you would say like, no, you don't. You can live in the gray, right?
Well, and I love, some of my closest friends are atheists who would literally say, I don't believe in God. And one of the conversations I've had with my dear atheist friends, because I would consider myself a believer in God, is they would say to me, well, how can you be certain there's a God? And my response is, I'm not certain. I'm not certain there's a God, but I'm convinced there is a God.
Yeah.
So I can live, because I live my life convinced of a variety of things, but there's few things that I'm going to say.
No,
I'm
I like
absolutely,
that. I think that's something you should say again. Like,
What I have been, and that actually gained credibility in the eyes of my friends.
That gains credibility with me when you even say it.
Well, because I'm not certain there's a God, but I'm convinced there is for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
Intellectually, personally, and I live my life as though that's true.
Sure.
Convinced of it. But certain, like, am I going to give hard... solid proof. But see, here's what happens with those who would consider themselves religious, if I may say so, is oftentimes the judgment you may be feeling or the rejection that you may experience for some within the in circle of religious ideology and beliefs, they're actually not responding to you in judgment when you have said, I don't believe this to be true anymore, particularly being in a position of spiritual authority for a period of your life. It's actually out of their own fear. Yeah. Because it's very unsettling for many people to say, well, I'm not absolutely certain. Like, I can't live in that gray. And I'm just really comfortable living in the gray.
Yeah. I've become more comfortable with it. I think that's
how I think about it.
Yeah,
I think when you encounter folks who seem to be a little bit adversarial because you have made some of these decisions and you're questioning things, I think it's more their insecurity and their fear than actually you. Sure.
And I will say this too. It's definitely more often than not that I don't experience people like that. People are usually pretty genuine and kind and
awesome.
Even when I interact with or see people who are in that circle, and it's always for the most part a positive interaction. I think it is in a lot of ways just the perception of the way the world works and the way it is, and how beliefs and certainties lead to a certain view of a person, and so that starts to linger in your brain. But this is I think if I were to give got to come to some sort of practical advice here, right? Practical advice to people, it's like, talk to your friends about religion. Don't avoid that conversation. Yeah. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do, to talk with my friends on. I have some really intelligent, believing friends, and I'm kind of in this gray space right now, and we have great conversations. I listen to what they say, and I said, that's a great point. They hear what I say, and they go, wow, that's something I've never thought about before. And it just creates more gray. Yeah. So if you don't want that, then maybe don't do it. But I don't know. I found some really,
and we've been very serious about that, even at 3 Words Podcast. I mean, we've stepped into spaces talking about politics and talking about social justice and talking about Black Lives Matter was one of our 3 Words podcasts. And some people were not real thrilled that we were tackling some of these issues, but I feel like it's more about how we talk about hard things and controversial and provocative things than even the conclusions we reach. We want to model here in D&B Coaching and 3 Words Podcast how to engage in conversations that we lean into people's stories, that we listen carefully, that we see people and don't go to quick judgment. We don't, in broad sweeps, say, well, then this is the camp, are you in this camp or in this camp?
Yeah.
In religion, in politics, in even economics. I mean, we could social justice. Are you in this camp or this camp? It feels cleaner. It feels tighter. It feels almost.
I feel like as humans, we want that.
We want black and white.
If I'm throwing in some of the anthropological studies I've done, we've always wanted that. We've wanted a set of rules that you live by, and this is how you get where you go. But I think as we just continue to live as a people, we see that's just not how it works, because even any let's talk about politics. Any type of policy put in place has a positive and a negative impact on a specific group of people. And the politics is figuring out how to navigate all of that, right?
Well
so
said.
it's not black and white. I mean, even I give this example often too, like one of the easiest black and white things, murder, right? It's wrong. Well, what if someone tries to kill you and I defend them and they defend you and I kill them? Like, is that wrong? Is that right? Is that courageous on my part? Like, there's nuance there. There's messiness there and you have to pick it apart.
Oh, I love this. Messiness, nuance. And I would say when we insist upon living in black and white, we're actually at greater risk of at some point rejecting the thing that we claim as black and white. When we live in the gray, at least some shade of gray, I feel like that belief will stand the test of time more than...
It's an open mind. Like the gray allows you to pull and go both ways and hear and listen.
Well, and you mentioned something at the beginning of your conversation. You moved past it quickly, but I want to come right back to it. And that is this idea that don't just accept the thing that you were raised with. Don't just blindly accept the belief that maybe was your family's heritage. Not that we don't honor that.
Absolutely.
We honor that. But we can at least ask the questions, lean into it, study it, explore it, which again, to some parents, that feels scary because, and we see this all the time. I mean, I work on a college campus and parents are really nervous about their kids going to college and then coming back after the first Christmas break and saying, oh, I don't believe the same things you do. Or I met this friend or I met the professor who said, it's like, so we try to insulate, we try to isolate, but that doesn't work. That's not the way life can be lived. So I love, and I encourage the same with my children. I have 9 children. And even as we sit around a dinner table, we sit around at the holidays, I have children. So I have 9 children, 4 biological children, 5 adopted children. Some of those children would say, I don't even believe in God. Some of those children would say, I might believe in God, or I might pursue my faith right now. I have one of my children recently who just started saying to me out of nowhere, I'm starting to pray more. I'm starting to see what seems like God's working in my life. This child has never spoken in those terms. And so again, and I'm fairly comfortable with that because I have no other choice. I mean, I could try to say, well, you have to and you should, but that's not going to help. That's going to backfire. We need to let people explore.
No, it's a great point. I'm reflecting back on my childhood, and my mom really did a great job of leaving. Like, she had beliefs, but my mom often led those beliefs with grace and kindness and love. Like, that was what it was about. It was about treating people with unridiculous amounts of kindness and just be nice to people and have manners, like those kinds of things. And like the religious piece was always a part of it, but I think that was always at the foundation was, the way we treat people is something that is really important. So it's been interesting, right? Like leaving it. And, one of the things that often comes into conversation is like, well, what did you want to do? It's like nothing. Like there was no sin I was trying to like participate in that I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. I want to do this instead. And in a lot of ways, we were talking about this earlier, it feels a little more freeing in some ways. I feel like for the first time, I feel free to think what I have always thought, and some of the doubts I've had about certain aspects in theology and religion. It's like, oh, that's okay. Like it's okay for me to live in that space where I don't see it that way.
So I'm curious, Casey, you use the phrase, I've left it, or I'm leaving it. What have you left? And where now have you find yourself?
It's a great question. I feel like I've left what you would call is the cultural idea of what Christianity is. Okay. I think I moved to a more, call it progressive version of that in some capacity. And then I think I got to a point where I was like, I don't even know if I think that, but it's still a very open-handed conversation with me. You'll never hear me say, I don't think God's real, like for certain 100%. You also never hear me say, I believe he's real 100%, right? It's kind of like, there are certain things that I know I don't feel like we can explain, and I understand that and I see that. So there's space for that. I think spirituality has turned more into my inner world and, trying to find peace with my relationships and trying to find peace with my routines. And I've always had that in some capacity, but that feels in some ways more spiritual to me now. It feels more like my whole self is into it versus like a checklist that I was maybe trying to do to be a good person.
Which is interesting. You talk about checklists, but I also have known you long enough that you would have been a strong proponent of this idea that religion is not a checklist or a list of rules of do's and don'ts, but it was relationship. It was a friendship. We've talked about that. What do you make sense? How do you make sense of this idea? Because in many ways, what I'm hearing is that you are almost like living out what you've been teaching for so long.
Yes.
But maybe like you were saying it, but maybe not believing it. Or maybe.
No, that's a good question. I think the cause of that action often was like, this is what you're supposed, this is the way the world is, and this is what you're supposed to do so that this is the outcome, right? I think I've just, that the freedom piece is like, what I want, like, and that could be selfish to some extent. I should have that checked by the people around me, but like, what do I want? Like, what is important for me in my life? And at the end of the day, it no longer feels like I'm being held to a certain standard for that. And that's my own standard, but I have to be proud of that standard when I'm done and look back and go like, is that something I was proud of? I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if I have a clear answer for that.
Well, no, and you did. You answered it, and I feel it was great. But I also wonder, and I'm curious how you make sense of this, but you also were in a very precarious position in that you were a seeker and a spiritual sojourner, and you were exploring those things while being, if I can use the term, a professional Christian. Yeah. I see this a lot where it's like, it's almost like those who are in the ministry, you use the term, you were on staff at a church. It's like that even gives less freedom to ask the question, to explore, and to really seek to doubt. I mean, did the person speaking from the stage, are they allowed to doubt? You probably felt a little bit like, I
got to a point where I told the people that I worked with that I just didn't feel comfortable being on stage. And that was when the conversation started to move. And I think that was really like the big turning point, was when I was like, I don't think I can, I'm not being true to myself. Like, I can't do this. I'm writing a message going, I don't know how to do this. I can't.
And as you say that, my respect for you does not go down. It goes up. Because how many folks find themselves in a situation where they are expressing what they do not embody, where they are promoting what they don't honestly believe. And that's where I feel like hypocrisy, secrets, hiding, and those kind of things begin to kind of play into, and it becomes the darkness. So to be honest, to be like, I'm not there, I would hope the people around you be like, Casey, that is so noble.
Yeah, no, I definitely got a mixed bag of reactions from people, but that was the people that I respected a lot. I definitely got that reaction from them.
So let's talk about the mixed bag. How has your family responded to this?
Great question. I mean, the different people have responded differently. I think the in and out group is there, whether or not you see it that way. It is there, and I do think that certain people look at it and go, "Well, you're out now," but there's hope. And it's like, okay, I guess we can move from those grounds, but whatever, we'll move with it. I really, with my family, my friends, like the thing that I'm trying to just stand on is like, I'm the same person. I'm not any different. Like, I still care deeply about people and like friends and family, and I'm still fun. Like, I'm still very much the same person. Those quote unquote fruits of the spirit, like love and joy. Like, I still feel like I embody those things because I see the positive outcome that comes when you do those things. So I'm like not different, and I hope that like, I don't know. I hope that shows them that, oh, okay, maybe Casey hasn't gone off the deep end, right? Like that kind of thought process. Yeah. So, I mean, it's been challenging. I've had hard conversations with certain people in my family. But there's also a level of respect, I think, for anybody going through something like this. Like, you have to set up boundaries, and we have done that with a few people and just been like, hey, I don't think this is a good conversation for us to have because it's not really going to be productive or helpful for us. If you want to like have an actual conversation around these topics, I'd love to, but our emotions and our feelings are getting into this, and there were a few times that I didn't say that before we got there, and it wasn't a good conversation. But yeah, I mean, mixed bags. It just depends.
So Teresa and I have just celebrated this month our 31st wedding anniversary.
Nice.
And we reflect a lot. We met each other when we were right before our senior year of college. And it's interesting, when we met each other and we were engaged, well, we were dating for 6 months, got engaged. We were engaged for 8 months and then got married, and obviously have built an extraordinary life together. We love each other deeply, and we have it's an extraordinary life with family and grandkids and so forth. But
we see your Snapchat.
Well, yeah, that's right. Our Snapchat, so there's lots going on. But you know what? We're different. Yeah. We actually, over the years, both of us have evolved, changed. We have different perspectives. Some of our perspectives are the same as when we were 20s, are different now that we're in our 50s. And so even within some of our religious and spiritual beliefs, our political viewpoints, obviously how we approach parenting, there's just a lot of differences, but yet it's been really great. And we're giving each other the freedom to really be who we are. I think about that because I think about you and Jenna. I know you and Jenna so well, and you've been married how long now?
5 years.
5 years, so a shorter period of time.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing Jenna, knowing Jenna, and obviously she was here on our 3 Words podcast. You are enough, I think was the 3 words that she did in our conversation. I'm guessing she's been very supportive.
I mean, she's been great. I think when I came home, and there was one day I was just like almost in tears because I was like, I can't do this. I don't know what to do. Like, I'm not trying to like quit my job and, this isn't going to work. What are we going to do? And she was just, like, what's most important is your like sanity and mental health. Like, that's number one. So if, you need to have a conversation, and we'll figure out what's next. And we did, and it worked out. And so super supportive. I think but still, like, there's boundaries in place, like, to some extent, for the limit in which, like, certain conversations, she's got a lower ceiling than I do when it comes to like those conversations. And she's like, I got it. You made that point last week, or we talked about that already, and we've learned and navigated that. But for the most part, she's been super supportive, and it's really helpful to have someone who looks at you and says you're not crazy when you're in the midst of pulling apart the things you've always believed.
Well, and that's when I mentioned that because, I took a little bit of a risk, obviously asking that question in real time. How are you and Jenna doing? But I want those who are partnered and those who are in relationships to just kind of embrace the fact that there are going to probably be really deep-seated, real convictions and beliefs that might evolve and change and shift over time.
Yeah, I mean, you would hope so, right?
I would. On some level, I would hope so. And I don't see that as threatening.
No.
I see that as good, but I also see that it's possible that people go around almost like, I view life more honestly like a running track than I do climbing a mountain, where you're like climbing farther and farther up this mountain and leaving things behind. It's almost like we keep coming back to the same things over and over again, but at a deeper level. And so I'm imagining you're going to continue to be on this kind of like, I'm thinking about this again, or I've been here before, but at a different place and a different level. But I also just want to give freedom. You're talking about freedom. I want to give freedom to the listeners to realize that the person you partnered with, and if you're going to have a lifetime relationship that's 50, 60, 70 years old together, there's going to be changes, and there's going to be shifts, and there's going to be perspective, new ideas, maybe shifting ideologies, the way we view things. Even the things that we care deeply about or more interested in, those things evolve over time. But I love the fact that it's about, you said it, I'm the same person I was. The foundation is there. The person we're partnered with or married to or dating or engaged to doesn't need to be alarmed. Like, you're you. And that's why I see Casey, I see you as no different.
Right.
I love having you on the DMB coaching team.
Yeah.
I just invited you off camera to keynote an event.
You did.
On our behalf. And I like, nothing's changed.
Yeah,
You're holding, because in our world, as you think about the 12 dimensions of life, spiritual being one of them, I want you to know that in every space that you go, you're saying to people, which you just have demonstrated, like, that's important. Spiritual dimension is important.
Absolutely.
And you need to navigate it. I'm here to listen, help, encourage, stimulate you toward continue to pursue that if that's an important dimension in your life. And that's what's important. That's what's most important.
It's like, I'm not here to tell you what to believe. Like, I'm not here to, I've had conversations with people who are in a similar space that I am. And if they ask me, I'll share, but I would often follow up with it. But that's not what I'm telling you have to believe. Like, I would encourage you to do your own research and ask people and talk to people and see what people have come up with, smart people who have taken time. I think another thought I would add too before we wrap up here is just the idea that when someone does open their mind to new ideas, it's not that they're, oftentimes in religious circles, it can feel like when you're swaying, right? Your foundation is breaking, or this belief you always had, it's crumbling. I would encourage you to look at it a different way. I would encourage you to look at it like someone is opening their mind to being influenced by someone else. Someone is opening their mind to new thoughts, new ideas, new perspectives. And if you change your mind, it's not because you have a frail foundation. It's because you're humble. It's because you're inquisitive. Because you're willing to learn and willing to admit that you might have been wrong before, and that's okay. That's a good place to be in. So that's super important to me. Jenna does a good job of helping me and reminding me of that. That's a strong value for her too. So yeah, that's what I'd wrap up with.
Well, and honestly, I would end it no differently than you just said it. You put a great wrap on this conversation because humility, inquisitive, open-handed, open-mindedness, all the things that I value deeply, and that is, in many ways, what you've not said in our conversation today, Casey, is to reject your religion, but to rethink it.
Yeah.
And that is noble, and that is awesome. And thanks for the courage of even sharing, because obviously there might be those who listen to this conversation who might go, I'm not so sure I feel good about that conversation, but I want you to know I do. And I value our friendship, and I respect the journey you're on. And thanks for being willing to share a little bit of your story today.
Thank you, man.
Well, I appreciate you sticking with us during this conversation today that was almost 30 minutes. Didn't want to cut it short. It was really significant. Hope you felt the same way. If you like these kind of conversations, or you like the content that we're creating and offering to you free of charge, would you do me a favor? Would you go to dmbcoaching.com/subscribe? Again, dmbcoaching.com/subscribe, and subscribe to our newsletter. It comes out every month. There's a lot of free content, things that you're not necessarily going to hear here on 3 Words Podcast, but we'll go deeper into some variety of topics around the 12 dimensions, and I think you'll find great value in doing so. So thanks again for listening to this episode, and we will catch up with you in a couple of weeks.